know, this cheery little reminder, this positive, happy message up here, you look at that and you say, what the heck? I was reminded of that because we're in the middle of Lent. Actually, we started Lent on February 10th, which means Easter's going to be a little earlier this year, in case you hadn't noticed. Easter's at the end of March, and you also may have noticed that Unity doesn't follow the Christian liturgical calendar, and there's a good reason for that. It's because we're a little bit too rebellious and free-spirited for that. But it doesn't mean that we totally ignore it either. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore, he had some interesting ideas about Lent. He actually wrote an entire book on the subject. The book is called Keep a True Lent. And back in the late 1800s, when Unity was just getting started, the Fillmores were really trying to offer a new vision of Christianity. And I think their ultimate goal was maybe to transcend it altogether. But in order to do that, they first had to reframe and redefine some of the key ideas, including Lent. Gradual, gentle change tends to work best, really. And nobody likes getting the rug pulled out from under them, so to speak, and the Fillmores knew that. One of the more interesting passages in Keep a True Lent wasn't written by Charles Fillmore at all. It actually comes from the foreword to the book. That was written by Georgiana Tree West, who was the minister at the Unity Center in New York City during the 1930s. And I think in just this short little paragraph, she really captures the essence of the entire book. Here's what she says. Too many people make a fad out of Lent. It is fashionable to give up some luxuries, and when those luxuries have to do with food and drink, it is profitable physically. There is also psychological value in the mental discipline involved, but such observance has nothing to do with being a Christian. Atheists could get the same benefit. We must learn to fast from all unworthy thought and feast on the good and the true. To observe Lent according to the Spirit rather than the letter, we must fast from criticism and condemnation and feast in brotherly love. That's what I'm talking about. That's that reframing process that we saw. Don't do away with Lent, transform it. I have to confess, I used to make a fad out of Lent. It wasn't because I was being disrespectful, it was because I was a kid, right? That's what kids do. I went to Catholic schools for all but 1 year in grade school, and whenever Ash Wednesday would come around, we would go to church. We went to church every day in grade school. We'd go to church on that particular day, though. We'd line up at the communion rail, and the priest would go up and down with a little bowl of ashes. He'd stick his thumb in there, and he'd mark the cross on your forehead. And as he did that, he would say those wonderful words that everybody longs to hear. Remember those words, any Catholics here? Remember, man, that you are dust, and unto dust you shall return. You'd think a 6-year-old child would get nightmares after hearing that. But the truth is that we pretty much forgot about it in favor of the really important business of comparing notes on what we were giving up for Lent, right? That's what we did back in those days, and people still do. As kids, we would give up stuff like, soda, candy, maybe a favorite TV show. Maybe the real overachievers would give up TV altogether. Games of one-upmanship like that, what would happen? And of course, how could you verify it? I mean, it was a whole honor system anyway. But we'd get older, maybe we'd give up coffee or smoking or something like that, and then it would kind of turn into a bit of a joke. I remember one guy every year said he was giving up pole vaulting and watermelon for Lent. I'm going to guess that Karen would like me to give up snoring for Lent. But it's really interesting that as children we would gloss over those words we heard about being dust and get right into comparing notes with the other kids. Now, maybe we didn't really understand what the priest was saying, or maybe it's more likely that as kids we had no sense of our own mortality. I don't recall losing any sleep over being told that I was returning to dust. Yeah, dust, whatever, what's for dinner, you know. It didn't make a big impression. Usually a reminder of mortality is used to motivate us to seize the day, right? To stop and smell the roses, so to speak. And children have no problem doing that, do they? It's the adults who need to be reminded that life is short. And here's where we get kind of a mixed message, because isn't the whole purpose behind Easter theology to convince us that life is eternal? We're supposed to join Jesus in the resurrection. Life is eternal, not short. There's no death if you die in a state of grace, as the church like to call it. So what's all the dust stuff all about? That's probably one of the real reasons I didn't think too much about it, because it was just confusing. And even people who believe in eternal life need a little wake-up call from time to time. That's why it's not such a bad idea to set aside some time each year to put a little extra effort and focus into our spiritual practice. I think that's what Lent is really all about. No matter how much time we think we have left or don't have left, or what we believe about what comes after that, there are always opportunities to learn new things and to grow and to give back to the world. After all, if we're not continuing to learn and grow, we're as good as dead. We're the walking dead. Zombies, right? The Buddhists have a real interesting way of delivering that wake-up call, especially the Zen Buddhist communities out there. And they do it every day, every evening after the evening meditation session. The leader of the chanting has this chant where they say this. They say, "Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly, and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Take heed. Do not squander your life." They chant that 3 times. If you've ever heard it, it makes an impression. It gets your attention. You literally go to bed that night, and those are the last words that are ringing in your ears as you go to sleep. It makes an impression. So what might an unsquandered life look like? Whatever we want it to be. What does it take for us to go a little deeper? How do we take advantage of an opportunity to go deeper in our spiritual practice? Well, today I'm going to recommend something we did 2 years ago during Lent. It's a little book called The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I say little only in the sense that it's not very long or particularly difficult, but beyond that, it's a big book that packs a lot of practical punch. And this is exactly the kind of thing I think that Charles Fillmore had in mind that he recommends in Keep a True Lent. Instead of giving up things, and we can do that, but instead of just giving up things, we give up certain patterns of negative thinking. We give them up, and then we replace them with something that's positive, something that's life-affirming. That's where I think the 4 agreements can help. These are 4 agreements that we make with ourselves, and they can help us in our spiritual and emotional intelligence, in developing our spiritual and emotional intelligence. So, here's the 4 agreements. Number 1, be impeccable with your word. Number 2, don't take anything personally. Number 3, don't make assumptions. Number 4, always do your best. All right, number 1, be impeccable with our words. Don Miguel tells us to be impeccable with our word because words are like a sword. That's the language he uses. Words are like a sword with 2 edges. Words are a sword with 2 edges. One edge is the misuse of the word, which creates a living hell. The other edge is the impeccability of the word, which will only create beauty, love, and heaven on earth. Or I might add the true, the good, and the beautiful. That's what it's all about. And here's an easy exercise to try to attempt to be impeccable with our word or words. I'm not saying that any of this is easy. That's something we have to work at. But here's an easy exercise. 3 questions to ask before we speak up. 3 questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it true? That means that at the very least we're not going to say anything that's false or misleading. Kindness means we speak with appreciation, with caring, respect, that kind of thing. And necessity means we're not gossiping or kvetching. Kvetching, I love that word. Yiddish words are just, they just have a, kvetching. You all know what kvetching is, right? Kvetching is complaining for the sake of complaining. For the sake of hearing yourself complain. Not trying to improve the situation or correct something, just complaining for the sake of complaining. And it's never necessary to gossip or kvetch. Complaining is another thing. If my food arrives at the table cold, I am perfectly entitled to call the waiter over and send it back to the kitchen, provided that I can be courteous, kind, and respectful in doing that, and then let it go. Not go on telling everyone else about the cold food and going back to the office and telling everyone, oh, my food was cold. That's kvetching. So that's never necessary. Okay, so number 2, the second agreement, not taking things personally. And that means that we let go of the need to retaliate and be defensive. Here's what Don Miguel says about that. He says, even when a situation seems so personal, even when others insult you directly, it has nothing to do with you. Their point of view comes from all the programming they received during domestication. They can hook you easily with one little opinion and feed you whatever poison they want, and because you take it personally, you eat it up. That's a wise insight. They give us the poison, and we willingly take it because we let ourselves get hooked. Doesn't have to be that way. This can be a hard agreement to implement, but the benefits can be enormous. And maybe we can start off by just being willing to not take something personally. Even when someone seems to be in our face, before we respond, we pause for a moment and ask how it might be if I refused to give in to this temptation to take what they're saying personally. And if we can create that pause, if we can create that space, then we can practice being impeccable. We can practice being impeccable. Before we speak, we make sure that whatever we're going to say in response, if a response is necessary, we ask, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? I think there's more to it than that. But that's a great starting point for learning how not to take things personally. Then the third agreement. Don't make assumptions. And I could, there's that cliche going around, don't make assumptions, because when you assume you make but I'm not going to go into that, you've all heard it. But we do it all the time, though, don't we? We make assumptions all the time. We assume that other people know what we want or know what we need. We assume people understand us. Here's what Don Miguel says. Whenever we make assumptions, we're asking for problems. All the sadness and drama you have lived in your life was rooted in making assumptions and taking things personally. Then he goes on to tell us that the best way to avoid making assumptions is to have the courage to ask questions. It takes courage to ask questions. Have the courage to ask questions until you are as clear as can be, and even then, do not assume you know all there is to know about a given situation. A little skepticism, a little humility go a long way. The reason this becomes an issue is because we operate under this mistaken idea that if someone loves us, then they should know what we want or how we feel. How many domestic arguments get going when someone says something like, well, if you don't know I'm not going to tell you. There it is, right? Assumptions. They're deadly. Communicate. Ask questions. Be clear. And the fourth agreement is always do your best. Now, how many of us hear that and think it means we have to try to be perfect? That's how we sabotage ourselves. Doing our best doesn't mean trying to be perfect. Here's what the author means. Doing your best is taking action because you love it, not because you're expecting a reward. Many people do exactly the opposite. They take action when they expect a reward and they don't enjoy the action. And that's the reason why they don't do their best. All right, so is it really possible to love everything we do? Is that really possible? I think we maybe need to take it a little bit deeper. Maybe we should focus on loving life and then seeing every activity that goes along with life as being worth our undivided attention. Instead of separating out the activities from our love of life, we make it a part of that process. We don't even have to like what we're doing, provided we can do it mindfully. We're not going to do our best if we are constantly being distracted by thoughts of like or don't like. Loving what we're doing means we put our entire self into it. If we truly, truly believe that life is good, then there's no activity that can't be used to express that goodness. And that's really, I think, the key to doing our best. So, that's it. That's my recommended Lenten practice for this year. Dust off the book if you have it, or pick a copy up and try working with it for the next 4 weeks. See what happens. And remember this, that practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. See you next Sunday. Thank you.